Hello, everybody. So very quickly, a quick introduction. So I've been working on XWiki in the company XWiki since 2004, so more than 20 years now. Before that, I had worked at Netscape. Who knows Netscape here? Not that bad, huh? Like this goes down with time. And I then worked in a French startup doing audience measurement. What was a bit characteristic of this job is that I learned to see what it was to compete with giants. So Netscape was crushed by Microsoft, and the company I worked for, a French company, got bought by and was competing first, and then was bought by an American company. And so I usually prefer to spend my time to help my company build open source and have the means to build open source code than talking about it, but in the end I end up talking about it quite a lot. I'm also a member of different associations that exist, or also helping some other projects like Open Food Facts. If you don't know Open Food Facts, great open data project about food. And Murena has great de-Googleized phone, and I'm a very small investor in that company, and I like what they do. I find it really interesting. So the company XWiki is a French and European independent company. The particularity of it is that it's self-funded, so we never took investors. I mean, just the employees put a bit of money. We're reaching over 6 million euros now. And we're continuing to grow. We're 70 people that are paid to build open source. And we build two open source software. So one is XWiki and the other one is CryptPad, which I talked about yesterday. CryptPad being about 10% of the company, so it's not that big inside the company. And everything we do, 100% of the code that we produce is open source. We're heavily engaged in digital sovereignty in the EU. And that's one of the big motivations to build an open source company, because I tend to believe that open source is absolutely key to actually achieve digital sovereignty in Europe. And so the company does support training, consulting, and hosting in the EU of our software. So XWiki is a knowledge management platform. So I don't know who has Confluence in their company. Yeah, quite a lot. So we do come back to your bosses and tell them that they should use XWiki instead. We can replace it, and we have great migration tools that actually would help us a lot in, of course, growing. So XWiki is a flexible and adapted platform. It's been created about the same time as Confluence, so in 2004. And so it's not a copycat. It's more like a copycat of wikis, because wikis were invented way before. And Wikis is kind of one of the, it's an interesting software. It's an invention of open source. It has been invented as open source at the beginning, and so it's very interesting to see that although it has been invented as open source, for a long time it's dominated by closed source companies. We're also, with the XWiki software, we're part of a larger project called OpenDesk. OpenDesk is a German state project to make a complete suite that could replace Microsoft 365. And so we're very happy to be part of that project, and this is something we believe strongly in, is that there is a need for a global solution of open source tools that collectively can replace the Microsoft stack in the large companies in the EU and everywhere. So XWiki has 8,000 installations more, and the company has more than 500 clients overall. CryptPad is much smaller. I talked about it yesterday, so I won't go too much in it. It's more geared towards the end users today, so an individual user, not companies, and protecting data with end-to-end encryption. So first, what I'm going to talk about how we manage to live from open source is only our story. So it's not the only story. There are many ways to live from open source, and I'm not saying that one is better than another. It's just our story, and there's many different ways to do it, and many ways that will probably be better for the type of software that you're building. So if don't think that this is like teaching of how you should do open source. This is just a story, food for thought, for if that can help anybody, that's useful. So the early years, I thought it would be early days and it would be fast. So 20 years obviously is not fast. So when I started doing XWiki, it was kind of obvious to me that I should do it as open source because wikis were made of open source. But the question is, okay, but I want this to be my job. I don't want to do this in the evening. So this is actually one solution. You can do open source in the evening. So how many people here actually do open source outside of their job? Yeah, a lot. So that's a very good way to do open source. But I kind of wanted to do it, the whole day. In the evening, I would prefer to go have fun with my friends. So there's many different ways, and I tried to map them. And because there are some ways that can help you be faster. So for example, raising money. That's an interesting way to do open source. Like there's lots of successful cases of open source software being created raising money. You get money, so you can spend a lot on R&D and build the software and you put it as open source. I'll talk about this one just after, because it's been a big question for us at the beginning of the company. And then you can be a volunteer, you can ask for donation, you could do service, so that's one way, and actually this way doing service is something that happened for us. But in the back of my mind, the idea was we want to be a product company, so we want to be focused on the product as much as possible. So the idea is we need to do open source and building product. So what I tried to map is how sustainable that is. Like the different methods, are they really sustainable? Can you achieve sustainability? This has been our focus for XWiki, to achieve sustainability. Now there's another way to do open source, which I put on the top right, is if you have a lot of money, if you're a millionaire or a billionaire, that you can do that. Unfortunately, this was not my case, and I couldn't do that. So one big question for us was, okay, should we raise money? The normal way of doing a startup in the industry is to go get money from investors. So there's a logic to why raise money. Is because it takes a lot of time to get to a critical mass that people take you seriously. That customers take you seriously. So the problem is, how do you fund that period, that long period where you haven't achieved that critical mass? So there was this question of raising money, and basically if I was in an incubator at the beginning of the company, and I went to conferences and everybody tells you, go raise money, and so we met investors. Now the problem I saw is, the more I was talking with other people that had raised money, that the reality is that when you raise money, you're very often not the boss anymore. So, you think you're the boss, but you're not. And down the line, at some point, you will lose the right to decide. And this has been the main reason for us to not continue towards that path, and to decide to take the longer path of doing it ourselves. Another risk that I saw is the exit OSS risk. So basically, the investors love the part where you grow and get known, and they love that you're open source in that case because you're growing your visibility, but at some point they will want to maximize the monetization, and that maximizing of the monetization is something that can be contradictory to the fact of being open source. And so that's why I believe that we see a lot of the private companies closing down, and they're closing down the source because the investors in the back are telling them that they want to have better financial results. The good thing is that when you're your own owner, you can actually decide the level of maximization that you want to achieve. And let's stop the word maximization. At XWiki, we're not trying to maximize. We're trying to sustain. That's a very different thing. And that gives you a lot of freedom in what you decide to do and what strategies you put in place. So for us, money has been seen as a mean. We need money to be able to pay people and code and do open source, but it's not an objective. The objective is not to maximize the amount of money that you get at the end of the year or at the end of a 7-year cycle. In the end, it's about choosing your path, what you're comfortable with. I was clearly not comfortable with the idea of launching an open source project, telling my community that, great, look, it's open source, come and take it, and X years later, either to go away with some money, or to be the one that says, no, now we have to close it, or exactly, things like that. So one of the things that I learned in these first years, not going the path of investors, is that open source is a great way to make an innovation known. So actually, this is why also investors do use open source a lot. Like they need to validate their technology with customers, and they need to make it known. They need to achieve some critical mass of visibility. And so open source is great for that. And in the first years of XWiki, this is how we did business. Wikis were new, it was something new on the market, so when you have something new that doesn't exist, then open source is a great way. It gives confidence to the people on the other side. You can get the first businesses, whatever the way it is, service or something else, you can get some first businesses because it's an innovation. So when you have an innovation, open source is a great way to get your first businesses with customers. Now the thing is, one of the aspects is that there is no success in open source without a good product. So that's transversal. So whether you do open source or you're not doing open source, if your product is not good, is not better than the competition, it's going to be tough. So in the end, we're in an open market where there is competition. So people have choices. And so they're going to look if they have a better solution or not. So you need to have a good product. I have a lot of discussion with companies that were doing closed source software and that were annoyed by the fact that there was an open source competitor killing their market. Because they're giving it for free. But very often what I was looking at is just that their software was not that great. And if they have difficulty to maintain their own business against open source software that would be free, is because the software was not so good, not good enough. So whatever you do, it has to be a good software. A bad open source software will have no success. And so it's important to work on that. The other aspect is that if you think sustainability, so the way I was thinking about it, I want to be sustainable. One aspect that is really important is how can I get the revenue of the company be directed toward the software and not what is around the software. So the software itself. So not around the service, but around the software itself. And that is really the big difficulty. So one little trick that we used, it took us quite a lot of years, I think we did it after 10 years, is that, so we were always selling support contracts. So people were buying us some service. So I'd like to do this with the XWiki software. Oh yes, we can do it. We were always selling a support contract with it. That was like, because we wanted a long-term relationship with the client that we would do business with. But sometimes you would have some clients that come and say, no, but I don't want this custom stuff, I just want the standard software. So that was cool that they want the standard software with no addition to it. But then they say, yeah, but I'd like you a couple days to configure it. So can you come and configure it in our company? And I said, yeah, sure, we can do that. The problem, and then we say, can we sell a support contract to maintain it over multiple years? And then they're, no, why should we sell it? Why, we don't need it. So, I mean, for years we've been way too nice and saying yes. We needed a bit of business. We wanted to pay the bills at the end of the month, so we said yes. And at some point we had this little idea that says, okay, so now today, just to be clear, you can't buy a day of service from the company without buying a support contract. So we just say no now. But at some point we had this idea saying, okay, we're not going to say no, but what we're going to do is it's 50% more for the day of service if you don't take a support contract. So if you don't commit to this open source software and decide that you're going to contribute to its maintenance in the future, then you will have to pay more for the service. So one idea for you, if you can't tell your customer no support, no service, maybe you can say no support, more expensive service. And that worked quite well. it worked well because it also allowed to explain what it meant to be open source. Actually, it launched a conversation with some clients that didn't really understand. They thought that this software is free. Like, oh, you're giving it for free, so it must be free. So it sounds logical. And in the end, by explaining that, okay, we're going to have a much more expensive day of service, it created a conversation about what it means to run an open source software. What's the difference with the proprietary one? Another aspect that I think is very important, but that's just when you run a company, is think about the values and your goals. What are the goals of the company? What are your values? So for us, it was really important for us that people are happy in the company, that they're happy to be to the job. I didn't create a company to manage dissatisfaction, which is a hard part of being a boss. And so it's very difficult, and it's even more difficult when the business is difficult. Actually, that's not completely true. So in our experience in the 20 years is that the phases where things are easier for the company are not necessarily the easiest one for the boss, because it's also phases of a lot of work, overwork potentially. If you have a lot of clients, a lot of demands. Right now we're a bit in that type of phase, and it creates a lot of pressure on the team. And phases where it was difficult were actually phases where the team really responded to the difficulty. I mean, I was really amazed in 2016, we had a really difficult time, and I just explained the difficult times. And, we created task forces, and everybody came in the task forces and gave their ideas. And so the team really responded to the difficulty and decided to participate. And so that's also an important aspect of the values. So for us, an important value was being a product company, creating a product, and another important value was creating a software that matters. And so if we're doing wikis, which are about knowledge management and that have the goal of raising the knowledge of people, if we're doing CryptPad that is protecting privacy, that's not a complete random. This is because these are software that our team can get more motivated with. They value. This is not the software that makes the most money. These are the software that motivates our team the most. And that's actually really important, because when you cannot keep up with closed source competitors' salaries, you need to have something else to make that people want to be there every day. So a really important aspect has been for us support revenue. So in order to reach sustainability and regular revenue, one really big aspect is focusing on support. Well, we also tried a lot of things because at some point when you run a company, you have on one side the software, you do a software, so you do measure how many people are using it, and do people like the software, but you're also measuring how much revenue you do. Can you get some revenue out of it? And sometimes you kind of lose focus. So sometimes you think that, okay, maybe the software is not exactly what you sell, so let's make a software on top of the software. And so we made verticals. Let's try to respond to collaborative watching, so looking at information from the market. So we had an offer in that direction at some point. We had an offer with the wiki, and we had an offer with general collaboration. So we created some verticals, and actually that didn't work out. This gave us a little bit of revenue with some clients, but in the end, it created so much work for the team to run almost different products that it was really difficult. We also tried SaaS the first time, it didn't work. I think this was more about the technical way of doing it. We didn't do it right. So sometimes you're not putting enough money in an area and you don't do it right. What has allowed us to grow in all this time has been research projects. So one thing in Europe that is actually quite interesting for open source people is that there is a lot of public and research funding. So in France you have specific French funding, so we can candidate to French projects, but you also have EU projects. And EU, when we got into EU project, it gave us regularly extra money. So not everything is perfect with research projects, because sometimes they tend to kind of move you away from your actual technical target with the product, so it doesn't always fund the product. So one of the things to be careful is really to try to fund the project, not fund something with the project that where it can extend your code base without really extending the value of what you propose to your clients. So that's one thing to be careful, but research money has been extremely useful for the company, and it's a very interesting way to fund open source projects. And what we did in the end is focus on one product, so every time we kind of moved on. We came back, and after trying something, we came back to the core product, to the core XWiki product, and the core value that was bringing in. One aspect of it is that, so one of the difficulty with open source software and its monetization, it's exactly the same one as a freemium. So you're giving something for free, and then you're asking people to pay something else, something more. The biggest difficulty that you get here is how much do you focus on the paying and how much do you focusing on the core free product? Because if you stop focusing on the free product, then you are actually impacting your diffusion. So how many people are actually using the software? And your revenue is automatically based, is a percentage of the people that are using your software for free. So it's very important to never forget that your monetization is only so good as how many free users you have. So you have to kind of find the balance. So is it the right time to enhance the monetization versus continuing to push to have as many users as possible? You know, and that's a real difficulty, because if you're not making any money, then you cannot fund anything. So how do you get enough money so you can fund something? So you have to find this balance. This is where the research projects add a little bit of extra money that is outside of that loop, and that gets you, that allows you to work on this strategy of how much you do for free, how much you do for paying. At the same time, if you don't do anything for paying, then maybe you will never know if actually people are ready to pay for your software, and maybe then you are doing something for nothing, because 10 years later, nobody will ever pay for what you do. Like, they love it for free, but you know, like if you ask people if they want a free Ferrari, you will have a lot of people saying yes, yeah, or yeah, give me a free Ferrari, you know, why not? If you're asking them to pay 300,000 euro, I don't know how much a Ferrari is worth at this point, you have way less people coming to buy your Ferrari. So this balance is really difficult to find. So at that time we started to have extensions to XWiki, and it will become a key element in our strategy. So over time we grew regularly. So I mean, we made 2 million euros. It's not that bad, you know. Like a lot of people would like to make 2 million euros doing open source, and so it's not that bad. But it was tough because we had to maintain a product, do service. A lot of the revenue was service, and a lot of the recurrent revenue, so the revenue that we get every year, was linked to the fact that we would do a service project with the customers. So we did a service project with the customer, and then it would become 3-year, 5-year contract, which would give us visibility to run, to continue develop the software. So that worked okay, but one difficulty is that, so, where am I? Oops. Yeah, sorry. So one thing that we noted is that at the time we were in competition with Atlassian. So while we were growing with our custom projects, what we realized is that we kind of completely lost the developer market. So the developer market, so the wiki is a great tool for developers. It's heavily used by developers. When you try to bring it to non-developers, which has been most of our market at XWiki for a long time, it's a bit more difficult because you need to convince that the wiki is better than Office. typically. But with developers, you had a bit less that problem. They loved wikis. But the thing is, wikis were, at that point, were sold as part of a developer stack. And that's where Atlassian took the business. So they were selling Jira and then Conference. And today you have GitLab that also includes the wiki, even though it's a very, very light wiki. So the problem for us is that actually Atlassian was not that expensive. It was proprietary, so you couldn't get it for free. It was not open source, but it was not expensive. And the companies didn't really care about the fact that it was open source. Now, they could care sometimes that it would be expensive, but it was not expensive. For especially 50 people, 100 people, not expensive, a couple thousand euros, and you had your wiki. And so we ourselves, we turned away from that market, because if we went with our open source software towards that population, at best, we would convince them to use our software instead of Atlassian, but they would never pay us for it. So we had no way of getting funding out of that specific target. It was a target that would have been really interesting from a influencing point of view, to influence buyers inside the company, but it was not enough. We didn't see it as enough. So in the end, XWiki mostly survived by doing custom projects on top of XWiki for non-technical users. And that's what we did for a long time. So one learning is that when it's less innovation, when the solution gets more mainstream, open source is not that a big advantage. So when we went to customers, open source, yeah, sure, okay, but it was not bringing a huge advantage or a significant advantage. It was interesting in the innovation phase, because it allowed to show the software to a lot of people, and the people interested in the innovation would come to us, but it was not that good when the market gets mainstream. So that doesn't mean that you cannot live for it, because we lived from it. You know, it didn't change the fact that over all that time, XWiki has never lost money. So we always paid the bills. It's just that you don't necessarily see the growth that you think you could achieve, given the fact that the technology is getting mainstream. So a big challenge of the technology market is that you have a winner takes it all market. So in the end, very often in technology, there is one winner. And whether this one is open source or not, so it can be open source, it's possible that this winner is open source, but it's not necessarily happening. So for us, it was a challenging period. So basically, we flattened out in terms of revenue. So I'm not explaining all these colors, but if you take the slides and you can look at them, and this is why I'm putting them, is because it can be interesting to see the share of the different types of revenue that the company has been doing. So we were fairly flat. Recurrent revenue was about 35%, plus research revenue that we managed to get from time to time by going after grants. And at that point, we refocused a bit on trying to get more service projects in order to pay the bills, in order to balance and not go down, basically. Otherwise, we would have gone down because of the competition, because of the fact that our product was not progressing fast enough compared to the market and what exists in the market. Now, the thing is, this period also forced us to be a bit less nice. Like, maybe if we had done what we started doing at that point, if we had started doing it at the beginning, maybe it would have changed a bit some of our revenue. Maybe it could have also reduced our diffusion. We don't know, huh? So that's not completely sure, but we think that a certain number of things that we started doing could have helped the company at the beginning. So one of the things that we learned also is that we need to explain to the market, we need to explain to our customers that open source is not free. So we found in that period a misconception about open source. So a misconception that open source equals I don't have to pay. And it's a bit also our fault as providers, because it was one of the big advantages that we were pointing out. Like, oh, you can take it for free. So in the end, we were marketing the idea that it was free. Actually, I think JBoss, which was acquired by Red Hat later, had an advertisement at some point is, they suck, we are free. So, I mean, in the end, you're pushing people to take the software because it's easy to take. There is something to sell down the line, but initially you're marketing the idea that it's free. And I think that's probably a mistake for open source, because the real value of open source, and we all believe in that, is actually the fact that the code is open, not the fact that you get everything for free. And so what we decided to do, so at some point we were, internally, some people said, okay, let's do an open core package. So we have this free package, and then we do something paying on top of it, and we modify it a bit, that version on top of it. Actually, this didn't work very well because it killed the lead process that we had, because most of our users came through the open source package, the free one. They came to xwiki.org, they get xwiki. And so when we did this second package, we created two different flows of leads, one on the commercial website and one on the open source website. And this was not good. And so at that point I consulted a bit, and I then realized that what was really important is that these two things really need to be connected. If the reason that people like us and know us is because we're open source, the revenue needs to go from the open source version to something paying. So there needs to be a path to go from free to paying. And so for us, that path has gone through paying extensions. So we had built an app store inside the XWiki software, and so you can install extensions. And so what we did is we decided to build paying extensions. But the particularity of our extensions at XWiki is that all the code is open source. So what we effectively did is we made the difference between open source and free. We said it can be open source, the source is here, but you won't get it for free. So you will have to pay when you download it. So the binary is paying, basically. And if you want to get it for free, it's possible, it's not impossible. You have to do the builds yourself, you have to do the installation yourself without our app store, and that's a potentially complex task. And given our customer base, it didn't really matter, because practically in our customer base, they didn't want to build anything, but if they got it for free, there would be an opportunistic way of not paying. So they would just not pay because they didn't have to pay. If they wanted to pay, they would have to go see their boss and say, I think it's really important that we pay for that software. It's open source, but do we have to pay? Would say the boss, and then they say, no. Okay, so then let's not pay. Because paying means making a paper and asking for an order to the buyer inside the company, and it's actually a lot of work. But if they have no choice and if they can pay with a credit card, if you can make it as simple as possible to pay, then you have an entry point towards paying. So what effectively it did is that it created a path for people to pay, and it also increased the value of the support contract. Practically now, today, for XWiki, if you buy a support contract coming from the pure free software, you will get all our extensions for free. If you buy the extensions, the pack of extensions, you will effectively get the support contract. So it's the same product. We have two products. One is called XWiki Support, the other one is called XWiki Pro, and effectively they're the same software. So there is only one software, has two names. One for the people that come from the extensions that they would pay, and one from the people that come from open source and want extra value because they want some guarantees on the open source software. And so we brought back these two passes, and it has worked quite well for us. So this challenge of balancing then the monetization and diffusion is actually was really the difficulty. And we believe that by doing this, we allowed the diffusion to continue. So it allowed to decide to continue, okay, we focus on this part that is completely free, make sure that we have as many people that use it as possible, and then we have the monetization with the extension. And we can respect our open source values by having this free software. So there are also some alternatives to that model. So some projects, for example, like Open Project, they actually have only one package, and inside that package you can use everything that's free, or you can pay for the extra features. So they bundle everything in one download. In our case, we go through extensions. So you click to get the extension. So so that's slightly different from the user experience point of view, but practically it's the same approach because all the code is still open source. So in 2016, we also launched a second product, TripPad. So that actually creates a bit of complexity inside the company because we have two products that don't have the same maturity in the company, but it also has benefits. So it allows us to have some synergy, so present them in a conference together, like I'm doing here, like I'm talking mostly about XWiki. Yesterday I talked about TripPad, so that's an interesting synergy for our two projects. It also, having TripPad inside XWiki that is a mature company, that is stable, gives more stability to the people. If TripPad was an outside project that had its own company, well, it would be tough because there would be periods where we might not be able to pay the bills at the end of the month. We would have to think about how much cash we have. And TripPad doesn't have to worry as much about the cash. It has to worry about its budget, which is not the same thing. And so it has some advantages to have open source project in the same company, and also some difficulties because you're not on the same cycle of development. So now, after a few years where it was actually quite difficult and we were having a tough time to grow, but we had made changes to try to have another, to kind of improve our situation. The thing is that we got a bit of help. And our biggest competitor, Atlassian, actually started massively to increase their pricing. So this is not something that was unexpected. So one of the reasons I went to open source is that I was also kind of not happy when I was a buyer of software. We had Oracle in our company for the database. And so I saw how the relationship was with the Oracle people. They're very, very extremely nice with you when you put the database in place, and then the next year it's a bit more difficult, the relationship when you talk about pricing. So they give you big discounts to start, and then they stop giving you these discounts. And so I was very aware that the proprietary software had a huge weapon. And actually this weapon is also true for cloud software, and even bigger for cloud software, is that they give you a lot of stuff to come to them, but at some point, there will be a tipping point where they will move to massive monetization. And being proprietary software, they will have this big power of deciding the price, and you will have a lot of difficulties to get out, because, of course, of the lock-in. So the lock-in is one of the main arguments that open source providers have touted as why you should buy open source and take open source and not proprietary software. This is also, the lack of lock-in is one of the difficulties for the open source providers. For monetization, it's not easy. You have less power on your customer, and that difference of power is sometimes difficult for you. When you're proposing your software. But what's for sure is that the proprietary software companies and the cloud ones have an immense power. You know, if you're using a cloud service, and it happened for us, we had a marketing service, and it was bought by another company, and they said you have 3 months to switch. This software is discontinued. We have this super offer to go to our other version of the software, which is 3 times more expensive. And so, you know, and they tell you, oh, and we have done a migration tool, so you just have to do one click, of course, to move that thing. And if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to move to their 3 times more expensive software, you have to do all the work of seeing how you're going to migrate. And the migration, of course, is complicated because a lot of the data structures are proprietary in the proprietary software. At that point, Atlassian started saying, okay, they had 2 offers, conference server and conference data center. So one was significantly more cheaper than the other, and they decided we're going to stop that one. that offer was doing more than 100 or 200 million dollars. So it's not a small revenue stream that they decided to stop. And so that first decision, recreated competitiveness for us as a software provider that had an alternative. And so we started having our first clients that would migrate. Before that, we had some people calling when they were increasing the number of users at Atlassian and the pricing was going like that. Like you double the number of users, double the price, which was not the case for XWiki, where if you increase the number of users, it was increasing a bit, but not as much. But every time, the migration costs were higher than the difference. We never made a business out of migrating a company before because of the migration costs. But here, the changes were so significant that you had either to, so typically people that had a 3K offer would either have to go to the cloud or take Atlassian Data Center, which was a minimum of 25K. So from some small clients, it meant a significant increase in price. For many clients, it was a doubling of price, and so typically that didn't play very well with a lot of the clients. And so we started having some clients. In particular, we got universities because Atlassian had great discounts for universities before that they had completely stopped. So a university with 50,000 students would have to start paying 50,000 user licenses when before they had an extremely good price. So we started doing that. Another aspect is digital sovereignty. So this is particularly true in the last 2 years since Trump came back to power. It has created a big boost in Europe of understanding that there is a huge problem of digital sovereignty. Like Daniel was saying, the bugs were there before. So the digital sovereignty issue was there way before the European governments realized there was a problem. But Trump made us all realize, made everybody realize that there was a huge problem. So we focused a lot into trying to make XWiki part of the common stack for open source collaboration software. This is why we're part of the Open Desk offering. And what happened is that with this first migration project, it completely changed our growth trajectory. It refocused us a lot on the product. So the learning here for us is that never completely think that what you do is wrong because it doesn't fully work. It has also a lot to do with the market. So sometimes your offer is on the right path, but you can't realize it because the market conditions are not allowing you to realize it. And so in the end, over these years, we did the right thing, but we only realized it when the proprietary cloud providers started changing their conditions, which is something that would happen down the line, but we didn't know when. So, I mean, one of the things as an open source company and as a big difference with proprietary software company is that the massive amount of people in the company are actually engineers and work on the product. So for the customers, it's actually great value. This is something to pitch with the customer. The fact that a massive amount of the revenue of the company is invested into the software. This is not the case of proprietary companies. The massive amount of money is spent in marketing, is spent in the business offering around it. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I'm already out of time. So yesterday I showed a bit data for CryptPad. So for CryptPad, one big difference compared to XWiki is that we decided we would never do any service. And that's much tougher, actually. So it's much easier to start with service. But it has this issue that at some point, if you want to reach scalability and sustainability, you kind of need to transform yourself. And this is what we did at XWiki, to transform ourselves progressively from a service company to a product company. For CryptPad, we wanted to be a product company right away. It is still tough. We're only at, an indicator that is very important is the recurring revenue percentage. So how much revenue can you count on from one year to another? And we're trying to grow it, but today we're only at 1/3 of it. And we hope to be able to go to 50% and 60%, but that's not guaranteed because it really depends on the growth that we can do on the product side. Otherwise, we will stay dependent on research money, which has been, for CryptPad, extremely valuable. So I want to thank also NLNet, the EU, because they have funded not only XWiki, but also CryptPad. One thing when you do revenue without service is that it strongly depends on the competition. Can you actually keep up with the competition? For CryptPad, it's very difficult because the competition is Google Docs, you know, like, so how do you compete with giants like that? It's extremely tough. With CryptPad, one particularity is that we focus on end users, so individual, like consumers is the right word, and they pay €5 a month. €5 a month is actually quite a lot for a consumer, for just one software. So a lot of people say, yeah, I would be ready to pay €5 or €10 if you give me email, photos, if you give me everything, but if you give me only documents, this is a lot for me. And Proton has a good offer in this area, and it works quite well. But the problem is the same. How do you build all that with the money that you have today? So it's a chicken and egg issue. And with consumer contracts at €5, then you don't need 200, you need 10,000. And so at this point, CryptPad is at 1,750, which is quite a lot already. 1,700 subscribers to CryptPad FR. But you need 10,000 to reach a first level of sustainability. And one challenge we have with CryptPad is if most of the revenue is actually coming from a SaaS, from a cloud service, so from a hosted version of CryptPad that we run, what is the role of all the open source instances that are being installed by CryptPad, by CryptPad admins? Since they don't have any revenue stream beyond donations. And today, we're about, in the revenue of CryptPad, we have about 80% that is subscriptions and 20% that are donations. So we could say that donations are linked to the instances, to the other instances, but it's not even completely true because we think that there's a lot of people that donate just also being a CryptPad FR user. Because there is a free version, a free offer on CryptPad FR. So it's a difficult question. At this point, we believe that it still has a huge role because it makes us known, but we have this risk. Well, if tomorrow we're break even with CryptPad FR, why do we need to keep the open source instance? So why do we need to stay open source? And should we become like Proton, which is only doing hosted software? So I'd like to say I don't want us to stop being open source, obviously, but we have to think, as a company, we have to think, how do we make that these open source instances participate to the funding of the software, and not only the online service that we run ourselves. I'm going to pass that. Yeah, I mentioned NLNet, so I mentioned next generation internet. Who knows NLNet here? Quite a lot already. So if you're running an open source project, even as an individual, it's a great way to get funding for your project. It's simple to candidate. You can get up to 50K and even more, but usually the first project is 50K euros for working on a good open source project. NLNet values in particular people that have good track record of contribution to open source, so they want people that are motivated by open source, not newcomers that never did it before. So if you have a project, do not hesitate to go after NLNet funding. Donation is, so I mentioned donation. We're on CryptPad, we have about 20K donation. For XWiki, we never even tried donations. Donations is complicated. I mean, some projects do manage it, so Mastodon has significant donations, so that's an interesting case. But for CryptPad, we realized that if we want to grow donations, then we have to spend quite a lot of time on it to advertise the project, to explain what we do with the money. And we're already doing that, I mean, we're being very transparent with what we do with our money in CryptPad, but we do it more for the subscription part and to keep people understanding what we're doing. I wanted to mention quickly the idea of foss fund, because so Daniel told, somebody asked Daniel, like, should somebody pay for the open source, for the fixes in security of open source software, or the people that use it. So I do believe that there should be bigger contribution by all companies for open source software. So that companies that heavily rely on open source should put in place a fund. So some companies have done it, very small funds. We have done it too. So we decided that we would give 1% of our recurring revenue to the software that we're using. And so we're doing a survey. So we're a bit behind right now, but we will distribute 23K for the year 24. So this is significantly behind. But the goal is to distribute 1% of the recurring revenue of every year to the different open source software that we use. Because even though we are open source, we also rely on many open source software. I think I'm a bit out of time, so I'm going to to pass on this. I wanted to give a bit. So when I was thinking about, okay, how do you do an open source business? One of the things I was thinking is, yeah, but AI is changing a lot the situation. What does it mean to launch a company or to launch a software today? And so I'm not going to spend too much time on the slides themselves, but you can look at them later. Trying to think what are the challenges that AI is causing to an open source company. So there are product challenges. So and one of the things that is interesting for software, knowledge management software, AI is potentially significantly changing the software itself. You know, does it still make sense to have a wiki if you can just query knowledge with AI? So we believe that it's still very important to have wikis because you need authoritative data to feed your AI. So the wiki is a very important piece to manage that quality data. What is interesting is that when you have big changes like that, and I think it's a bit the same with the security challenges, that every change like that can be both a problem, but can also be an opportunity. So as a company, what you need to look at is what are the opportunities that you can get out of it, and you need to be ready to change your company in that direction. So I'm not going to talk about security because Daniel talked about it quite well, but we see exactly what he's seeing. So AIs can find bugs in our software. And so my take is that we will stay open source. It will not make us go away from open source. I think that the companies such as Cal.com that has made a communication about stopping open source because of AI, I believe it's an excuse to what they wanted to do because their investors are asking them to do is to increase monetization. What I think is that AI is an opportunity to actually fix the bugs. The issue is the speed at which you fix them, and that's a real challenge. But I believe that what's important is to fix quickly what AI makes very cheap to find. And so that's what I believe needs to be focused on. And I'm going to pass on this. And I want just to thank our teams for all the great work that they've done on our products over the years, because of course this is their work.